Okay, welcome to the first video of the content in this course. Starting out simple with Introduction to Statistics, some basic content on which we can build our semester. And before we even get into statistics, let's talk about social sciences, right? Because this is a statistics for the social sciences course. Hopefully you have an idea of what these are, given that you're in this class. But if not, or if you'd like a refresher, let's talk. So, backing up even further to what science is, in its most basic form, the common unifying theme to all sciences is that we use the scientific method, right? This is one way of knowing, one way of understanding our world by asking questions and then seeking answers to those questions. And in social sciences, then, right, we're the science of social. That sounds kind of weird. But basically, we're studying people and groups of people, right? That's kind of what the term social in social sciences refers to, such as societies and cultures, whether it's of our time or of previous times, nations, right? So more formally defined groups of people in terms of law and policy, organizations, right? So this could be businesses, but it could be any other sort of organized group, such as a team, a volunteer organization, nonprofits, political groups, right? All kinds of different things. And obviously the individuals within these different groups of people. And so in this class, we have people from a variety of social science majors, but I'd say the most common one is psychology, and that's my background. So I wanted to address that a little bit more specifically. So this is a lot to take in on this slide. This is something you can see down here in the bottom left. This is the indigenous ecological systems model. One way of kind of understanding individuals within the context of all these systems that influence individuals. And so in psychology, that's what we're studying, right? Psychology is the study of I define this all the time. Psychology is the study of human behavior and mental processes, right? And so typically we're talking about that in ways that we're trying to generalize to the aggregate, so people in general, but we do that by studying individuals. However, it would be ignorant of us if we didn't take into account the fact that individuals are influenced by lots of other things besides themselves, right? Rarely do we really find ourselves completely uninfluenced by things around us, right? And so this is kind of, it might be counterintuitive to take in, might be intuitive for some of you. But in general, the way to think of this, so we have this individual here, and you can see the circle for the individual. These things are within that, right? So in other words, within the individual, there are these cultural and historical factors that influence who they are, right? So I'll use myself as an example, right? So I'm from Kansas. I grew up in that like Midwestern culture that's kind of has some carryover from, I guess, more like Old West days, like farming, agriculture, cowboys, all that kind of stuff. I'm also of primarily Irish Catholic descent. I was raised Roman Catholic, right? And so those kind of cultural factors really influenced me and who I am. And the historical factors associated with that, right? In terms of my ancestors leaving their homes and eventually immigrating to what is today Kansas, right? And so those things obviously influenced who I was, the environment I grew up in. And I was within that environment that is immediate, right? The microsystem, meaning like your family, your friends, the people you're around, close proximity to, essentially. However, right, we don't just live in this little bubble, right? We have different environments that we go to. You have different classes, different groups of friends, maybe different jobs. You might travel to different places, right? You hang out at different people's houses, whatever it may be. And so that we refer to as the mesosystem, these interactions between those immediate environments we find ourselves in. But there's also more distal environments, this exosystem, right? So those are things like, I'm recording this in Fairbanks, right? Things like Fairbanks borough policy, right? Or Alaska state policy, or the fact that we're part of the United States, right? So what happens at a federal level can influence us as individuals, right? And so these are these distal or distant things that can influence us, but we kind of find ourselves here in the middle, right? We have our own history and culture that influences us, And that will obviously influence our environment, but at the same time, our environment is not purely a product of our history and culture. And it's also influenced by environments that are far beyond ourselves um, and those immediate things we find ourselves surrounded by. That was a little wordy. Hopefully that made sense. But wrapping that up, so psychology, we study the individual. We need to take these other things into consideration. And other fields like sociology, economics, ethnic studies focus these systems more specifically. And when it comes to the individual, then, right, if other fields are studying the systems, we're studying the individual. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but this is something I show in most of my classes just to really depict the fact that even when we look at the individual, there are lots of things to consider, right, in terms of the interaction between the individual and their environment. So here we have a person, their behavior affects their environment, such as their physical environment and their sociocultural environment. And the environment will give them feedback, right? Give them consequences if you're rewarded or punished for your behavior, if it's encouraged or if it's discouraged. And then within us, right, we have all these other things that can influence how we behave, how we think, how we feel, right? Our affect, our mood, which can be subject to internal things like our biology, if we're hungry, if we haven't slept well, right? Those types of things can be influenced by our environment too. Our cognition, right? So how we think about things, how we approach things, our biases, our past judgments or prejudices, right? All these different things that can influence us as individuals. So I wanted to mention that. And then when it comes to statistics, right? So if we have all these different social sciences, psychology just being one of them, statistics, though, is sort of the toolkit that we all use, right, across these social sciences. It might not always look the same, and we might use different tools within that toolkit, but this is essentially a big piece or portion of that overall toolkit. And what statistics are, essentially, is a form of math, right? There are these mathematical procedures that we can use to help us summarize, analyze, and interpret the observations that we make in our research. Right, so if I'm a researcher and I am studying, I don't know, I'm looking at a bear in my office, this little bear statue, so we'll go with that example, even though it's not a person. Say I'm studying the bear population, right, and I want to see if climate change is affecting the point at which they enter and leave hibernation, right? Then I could go and make a bunch of observations, maybe set up trail cams, do something like that. And statistics then can help me to take all those individual observations that I might make over time and summarize them, analyze them, and create broad conclusions or draw broad conclusions from all those observations. And there are two branches within this. It's not super important to know the difference, but it's worth mentioning. Descriptive statistics basically are what they sound like. We're just describing things, right? So what we observe, we're summarizing sample results. We'll talk about samples and populations in a second. Inferential statistics then are used to infer things about the bigger picture or generalize to populations. So using that example, say I studied a bunch of grizzly bears. Descriptive statistics might just be basically describing what I saw, right? I studied 25 grizzly bears over this point in time. They ranged in weight from 800 to 1,200 pounds. They ranged in age from yada, 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 so on and so forth. Inferential then might be to infer, if we use that data to infer things about bear hibernation in general, right? So we say, oh, it seemed like these bears were leaving hibernation earlier in the year than in years past. Therefore, we can infer that climate change is affecting their hibernation cycles. Right, so kind of an example of the differences there. And so I use the term populations and samples, something you've probably come across, but worth mentioning and reviewing here. Population is an entire set of individuals or items of interest, right? So it's all the possible sources of data, essentially, or all the possible subjects, right? Or items of interest within whatever it is we're studying. So if we're studying grizzly bears, it would be all possible grizzly bears, right? And we need to define that. It could be we're interested in all bears in the state of Alaska or all bears in the world, right? This sample then is a representative subset of that population. Obviously, it would be really hard to study every single grizzly bear in the world. So we might just select a few that we're studying in depth. And in social science and psychology, most of the research that we do is done on samples, simply because we usually just don't have access to an entire population. Like if I'm doing a study with UAF students, it's going to be really hard for me to actually study all UAF students. And even if we do try to, like say we send out a survey to everyone in the university, realistically, we're not going to hear back from everyone, right? So pretty much always we're working with a sample because we're limited by a lot of factors and trying to access the entire population. And so just again, what we talked about previously, descriptive statistics are summarizing the sample results, right? So if I do a study of UAF students, descriptive stats would help me to describe the people that responded, and inferential statistics then generalize to the whole population. So I might look at that sample of students and say I asked them about their satisfaction, their sense of belonging, their academic achievement, right? These types of things. I might use that to make conclusions about all UAF students. Another picture, if it helps. So you can see here using actual little like people icons. You can see that it's selecting some of those icons and pulling them into the sample here. And so some examples of descriptive and inferential statistics. I don't want to spend too long on this, but this is from some research I did in the past. I started grad school in 2013, right around the time that Colorado was legalizing cannabis for recreational use. My background's in occupational health and safety, and at the time, health and safety in the industry was really unregulated because the government had their hands full just ensuring that people were legal cannabis organizations to begin with. And so we did a study, my team and we did a study on health and safety in the industry. And so I made this project report back in the day, so I figured that might be a good example of some descriptive stats. So you can see here, these are snapshots from the report. You're welcome to pause if you want to look more closely, but for the sake of being brief here, so at the top we have worker health and injuries, basically just describing the different injuries people have had on the job, right? So we asked them to respond to questions about, basically like how many of them have had these different symptoms at work as a result of what they did at work. So you can see 101 workers said that they had back pain. Right, so it was 54% of people that responded to our survey. Then down at the bottom, a little bit more specific information about, I can't remember what this one was. I think it's if they required medical attention. Oh yeah, seeking medical attention. So you can just see more information on some injuries they had where they had to get medical attention at work or as a result of an injury at work. More information here, some stuff about health and safety training, because this was really sporadic in the industry, or what's the word I'm looking for? Not sporadic, inconsistent. So you can see some people received no health and safety training. Some received really, really good health and safety training. So that varied a lot. Symptoms after handling pesticides. So if they had any sort of health symptom after handling pesticides at work in grow operations. There's some examples there. And this is from, so it was an industry report. This is from a research article about the same project. So you can see just some other examples of how it might look in a research article. Basic demographics, gender, age, race, some mean scores on some different scales that we gave them, stuff like that. Inferential statistics then, right, again, we're inferring stuff about the broader population. This is from a different piece of that study. And the key thing here is this this graph down here, I think, is the most approachable thing to interpret. So we were looking at this, I'll try to keep this brief. So we're looking at people's perception of a variety of things. And so you can see here on the y-axis, sorry, my mouse keeps disappearing. I hope you can still see this. On the y-axis, we have job satisfaction, right? From 1 to 5, 5 meaning very satisfied, 1 meaning very unsatisfied. And you can see here we have low stigma and high stigma. Basically, if people felt like they were stigmatized for the work they did, so people in reporting high stigma would say that, I feel like people really stigmatize me or view me differently because of the work that I do. Like some people might say that, oh, my friends all think that I'm I don't know, just a druggie or something or a stoner because I work in the cannabis industry. People saying low stigma would say the opposite, right? They'd say that no, my friends accept me and they don't really seem to think of me any different because I work in the cannabis industry. Oh, sorry. And then we have two lines here, right? So this line is low job control and this line is high job control. So here you can see people with high job control. That means that they basically get to do what they want at work, right? They still have to do the job, but they get a say and determine how they do it. And so you can see here, people's job satisfaction was pretty much the same if they had a lot of job control. They had a lot of autonomy and say over how they do things at work. Their job satisfaction was the same regardless of if they felt stigmatized for what they do. Whereas people without much job control, if they felt pretty stigmatized for their work and they didn't really have any control over how they do things on the job, then their job satisfaction was much lower than people who did not feel stigmatized by people, right? So just kind of one example of this, and doing this analysis, we were trying to draw some inferences just about people's attitudes about work in the cannabis industry, right? And all these factors that might affect their job satisfaction. So just one example of inferential stats. If you want to interpret another graph here, you're welcome to pause it and go for it. But to kind of wrap this video up, looking ahead, some topics we'll cover in this course. So modules 2 through 3, what we're doing right now, and the next module, basic intro stuff, and then we'll talk about statistical software. Modules 4 through 6, we'll do more descriptive statistics and basics about statistics like distributions. You might have heard of normal distributions before, those types of things. And then in the remainder of the course, we'll go into inferential stats, right? So this is where we get into more hypothesis testing. But again, didn't want to go into too much depth with all that. Just wanted to get some basic information about statistics in this first video. So we will stop there and see you next time.